Hello, I'm Colin Glass, a Director and Treasurer of Pasture Summit. Welcome to our Pasture Summit videocast on financial planning and budgeting. Pasture Summit is organised for farmers by farmers who believe dairy farming can and should be profitable and rewarding. Our mission statement is securing the future of pastoral dairy food production and vibrant and sustainable farming communities. And our value proposition is bringing together a positive community of pastoral farmers to secure a successful future. Financial success comes from operating a fundamentally profitable farm system based on grazed pasture combined with disciplined financial management. This is more important today than ever before as New Zealand and the world encounters the challenges of volatility, including COVID-19 and other financial local pressures. Today's video is brought to you by three of our young Pasture Summit farmers who talk about what their farming philosophies and key drivers of profit are and how they go about developing and monitoring budgets. We would like to thank Dairy NZ for their support in producing this videocast. We'd also like to thank our banking sponsors, Rabobank and ANZ, and appreciate the valuable insights that they have provided as part of this videocast. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and we're always open to feedback, which can be emailed or entered on our Pasture Summit website. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Paul Bird from Dairy NZ and I'll be your facilitator today. Firstly, on behalf of Pasture Summit, I'd like to extend our thanks to Dairy NZ and our banking sponsors Rabobank and ANZ for their support. Rabobank have provided valuable commentary in conclusion of this videocast. Hello everyone, welcome to Pasture Summit, where we're discussing financial planning and budgeting with our highly qualified panel. And it's my pleasure to be facilitating this discussion. We have three farmers with us today: Olin Greenan, farming in Waikato, close to Morrinsville; Daniel Woolsey, Southland, farming down there about half an hour east of Invercargill; and Robbie Ferris from the King Country, close to Tauranui. So welcome Olin, Daniel and Robbie.
Thanks Paul. Thank you.
And we also have an economist with us, Mark Neal with Dairy NZ based in Hamilton. Mark also has an interest in his family farming operation in Australia. So welcome Mark.
Yep. Thank you.
So today our focus is on financial management and budgeting. Milk price, as usual, is volatile and unpredictable. There's increased pressure out there from banks to pay down principal. However, those farmers that have robust farm systems and excellent financial management are making very good profits. And that's what this discussion is about today. So, Olin, if we start with you, you're a herd-owning share milker. Just tell us a little bit about where you are now, what your goals are, and some of your farming philosophies, and how these are important in relation to making profit in your business.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So we are 50-50 share milking 650 cows just outside of Morrinsville for Piako Middle Farm Limited. I guess we're in essence trying to follow that grass curve as much as possible, match cow demand with the grass curve. Couple of key targets we have here, particularly in the Waikato with supposedly harder summers now. We're concentrating on that pre-31st of December production. Our target here will be at least 750 kilos of milk solids per hectare, and we can successfully do that on zero supplements. We're roughly about 200 kilos of bought-in feed per cow, and that's primarily to get us through the summer and into the autumn to build a condition score for winter.
Yeah, and you've always had a passion for grazing systems, grazing grass. That's your thing.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's probably why I've ended up in New Zealand, Paul. Growing up in Ireland, reading the Farmer's Journal many years ago, New Zealand was a place I wanted to visit, and here I am 20 odd years later, and have tried and followed those tried and tested principles, and it's been good for our family and I. It is it has allowed us to climb the progression ladder within New Zealand and ultimately hopefully reach farm ownership.
Thanks, Olin. Robbie, you're in a family farming business where generating shareholder wealth is important. So just tell us a little bit about why you're farming, tell us about your system and the sort of financial performance that you expect from your family business.
Yeah, so simple repetitive business focusing on high pasture harvest and minimal mechanical intervention. And as with any business, profit drives it. It provides growth, provides us with opportunities, and generates shareholder wealth. All the family that's here is involved in the business, so hence really important for any business to do that. But when family's involved, it's just as important. So 14 tonne a hectare pasture harvest is one of the key KPIs or drivers of the business pool, and then our operating expenses being $3.50 a milk solid or less, and or $3,400 a hectare or less on an average, sort of 5-year average. Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. Now, Daniel, over to you. You've got a large operation down there in Southland. You have more than one farming unit. You've got lots of staff members involved in the business. So just tell us a bit about how you've designed your system and how important the grazing aspect of that is, that enables you to generate the profits that you need for yourself and your family.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I guess the system has just developed over time, and it's been in the game. I guess the last 20 years, I get to know a lot of people, learn a lot of systems. So we've just taken it to a point where it's very simple and replicable, just like Robbie has, so that we can run multiple properties or a bit of scale. So the aim is literally to only feed what's grown on farm to milking cows. It's probably our biggest philosophy, and that comes back to Robbie again. So a low input system, but with medium outputs, which is showing to drive us profit. There should be some figures that'll come up in front there, but the aim is to be at least $1,000 a hectare on operating profit compared to anyone else in Southland, and hopefully that will compare with the rest of New Zealand as well. So just back on the financial side of things, we need to analyse our needs versus our wants annually, and we also need to understand what we grow so that we can stock the farm accordingly to follow our growth rates. Now this is actually was shown in our previous webcast. We discussed that, so an opportunity to have a look back at that. I guess the KPIs that we look at are our farm working expenses. Those are the I guess what I can control. I can't control brought in feed prices too much or the milk price, but I can control our farm working expenses, which leads us into giving us a good economic farm surplus. One target we target every year is to pay $1 a milk solid debt repayment. That's our target in the good years, and we'll probably talk a bit more about that later on.
Thanks, Daniel. And just to clarify for people, we've put up your operating expenses per kg milk solid over time, and the difference between farm working expenses and operating expenses is largely that depreciation and any sort of unpaid family labour in there. So you can see your significantly lower cost per kg milk solid than the Southland average in there. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
So, Mark, just perhaps a comment from you when we look at financial performance across the industry. What do you see in terms of the range that's out there?
Yeah, so what we see on average is that farmers aren't getting a solid operating return for their effort, and this means slow growth in equity and pressure on cash flow. However, we see the top 25% are doing substantially better, and they've got good alignment between their operations, getting to a higher pasture harvest. They have good planning for low expenses per hectare, and they've been quite disciplined with their capital investment.
So I'd like to just now talk a bit more about how you go about doing your budgets. And Robbie, just to come back to you, and we'll just show your KPIs. We've got your operating profit per hectare coming up on the screen, and a similar trend that we saw with Daniel in terms of that gap between profit per hectare between yourself and the Waikato. You're the blue line, and the Waikato is the red line. So you're achieving a higher operating profit per hectare. And then we can also see your cost per kg of milk solids, which is the next slide. And again, we can see that you've got a lower cost per kilogram of milk solid than the average of the Waikato. So looking at that, you're obviously doing something very well in terms of either generating higher revenue, or you've got lower costs, or a combination of both of those. So just tell us about how you create your budget for the next upcoming season.
So we look at what we can control, and cost is something that we can control. So like you say, we do a mix of looking back, but we also use a little bit of zero budgeting as well. So we'll be aware of the successes we've had in this previous season or previous seasons, but we'll be probably more aware, or want to know more of the failures that we've had. So if we're looking at a budget, where did we go over, and then why did we go over, so we can answer that question so it doesn't happen again. And then as far as using a bit of zero budgeting, if like 5 or 6 seasons ago we get a payout of $4 at the start, that's when zero budgeting can become very useful. And it can become very useful in a number of ways, in the fact that when I say we control our costs, what we're doing, and you'll see it in the 2018 season, our operating expenses came up a bit and the operating profit took a little bit of a nosedive, but that was, we were aware that we were generating quite a good profit that season. We had done the season before and before that, so there was a little bit of money in the bank and a bit of confidence there. We spent a bit more on R&M, did a little bit of capital fertiliser, things like that, and what that allows us to do is that when we do get a drop in payout, or we need to do a really tight budget, or a war budget, as people call it, we can pull back on a lot of things. We can mine fertiliser, and R&M's all up to date, so we can take away from a few of those things. So yeah, it's essentially how we sort of look at budgeting.
Oh, that's great. You mentioned zero budgeting. Can you just, so that's sort of like clearing the decks and having a blank sheet of paper. Can you just explain what zero budgeting is? How do you do that?
So that goes with the philosophy that in dairy farming, or I suppose most businesses, that people say, oh, there's a lot of fixed costs. Well, why don't we make them more variable? So let's go zero with everything right at the start. But I look at it as that they are all variable, just some of them are stuck harder in concrete than others. So we go back, look at what we absolutely need to run the farm, and if it's not needed, then we put a line through it, start at zero and work up, instead of starting at the top or the year before or your average, and working back. It's one of those things where it changes your mindset again, and you look at things from a different angle, and you get a different outcome, a better outcome essentially.
Right. And Daniel, you are involved in a benchmarking system in your region. Just explain a bit more how you go about creating your budgets, and then also how you get benefit out of that benchmarking comparison with other groups.
Yeah, I suppose if I start with budgeting, our system is reasonably consistent year on year. I've got a fair idea, I know what our costs are. The only variables that really change in my budget each year are the income, the amount of tax we pay, and the amount of debt repayment. Other than that, our working expenses are reasonably, only go up and down a little bit depending on our production. So yeah, we do monthly and annually variance reports. So we're looking at 1 year versus another's actuals. That's always quite good. quite noticeably. There's a lot of things that have gone up 10% in the last few years, and wages is one of those, Robbie. And then also budget versus actuals, which tells a picture. And when you've got business partners, it's quite you come up with some quite good explanations on why you spent more than you should have in that certain area. But yeah, annual budgets, good starting point. We've got this year's budget, obviously it's been accepted by myself and the board, and next year's one's already made, along with our wool budgets for the next 2 years as well. So by a wool budget, I just said it as, imagine this year's going to be $5 and next year's going to be $5 as well. And how does that look? And probably when you think about, we discuss benchmarking. Benchmark your current budget versus your wool budget, and question why my farm working expenses is $4 versus $3 in my wool budget. I guess there's a little bit of farming philosophy in what you want to achieve, but what can we mine? Why is that extra dollar in there? And why are we not currently budgeting like that now? Why aren't we running a system like that every day?
Thanks, Daniel. So just coming to you, Mark, there's been a couple of comments around fixed and variable costs and sort of accounting or economist terms, and it sort of implies some you just can't, you've got no control over, and others you have. So you've done a little bit of work on this, haven't you, in terms of seeing which ones are and aren't. So can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the outcome is virtually every cost is a variable cost. We know this looking at the cost categories in dairy base, and the variation across farms, which is huge. One of the items that we have identified is that many other expenses increase with supplement use. Some of these are obvious, like labour, repairs and maintenance. Others are less obvious, like depreciation and the cost of more cows if the stocking rate has increased along with the imported feed use. Some researchers from Lincoln University showed that with increasing intensity of importing feed, farmers spent more on animal health and breeding on average. And this does seem to be expected if the stocking rate went up. If you have more cows, you'll spend more. However, those farms also spent on average more per cow. So it is actually a reflection of less disciplined cost control. So yes, there are a lot of variable costs that, if the farmers are less disciplined, that they are variable. You will spend more if you're not disciplined.
Thank you. Olin, over to you. We're throwing around these terms. We've got fixed costs, variable costs, budgets, benchmarking. There's all this financial jargon and terminology, and a lot of people are out there it's not their passion, is it? They just want to be out there with their cows, managing their farms. How important is this financial understanding and capability with people, particularly people progressing through the industry? And just tell us a little bit about how did you build your sort of skill level in this whole area of financial management?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul, because I just had it in my notes there. Why, the simple why do we budget? And it's not a very popular topic within farming. Farmers will spend time on working out the next 30 days feed on the farm. In my eyes, it's just as easy to work out the next 30 days income and expenditure. So I suppose, why do I budget? I suppose in a lot of ways it gives me control, or a certain amount of control and visibility, just like a feed budget does as well. So that's one of the fundamentals why we carry out budgets. It sort of gives you a clear handle on where you might be headed, and what you might have to do if there's some headwinds ahead. So I guess when coming to New Zealand and wanting to share milk, I suppose the key thing, you had to drive profit, and you had to have the ability to have financial discipline in order to reach your next goals. So in order to do that, in quite simple terms, you needed to know what your income was and what your expenditure was. So when I had the first desire to go 50-50 share milk, and I guess I realised we needed a certain amount of money. So we set around some personal goals around saving and that. And then in that first initial share milking job, presenting budgets to the bank to get approval was very important. And as a result of that, I think the competitive nature, then using benchmarks and trying to be the best amongst your peers as well. You can't benchmark without sort of accurate data. So it is an area I'm very interested in, and I guess I'm sounding we're lucky in today's era, Paul, that we have so many electronic aided methods of putting in budgets and changing cash flows. I can't understand how people used to use pencil and paper and an eraser. It must have been a very painful exercise. So I guess there's no excuse for younger people to sit down and get their head around an Excel spreadsheet and start putting those figures together. Just like they'd work out how much grass they're growing and how much supplements they're putting in. It's exactly the same, and it's one of the four pillars of our farming system. I guess we've got our finances, our pasture and crop, our animals, and our people. So that's sort of just one of the important quadrants in our business.
Thanks, Olin. Well, I still remember doing budgets with pencil and paper, and I'm sure Mark Neal does as well. So
you aged well, Paul.
Now, Robbie, just a question for you. We're talking about people may need to make some changes around their level of knowledge around just financial management and taking some actions in that area. Sometimes it's a big area around taking action around your actual farm system. Your fundamental farm system might not be just generating the profits that you need, and tweaking might not solve it. So you and your family made some changes to your system. So how did you make that decision to change? And for anyone that's thinking about this, how do you actually make the start?
Yeah, interesting you say that, Paul, and talk about sitting down with a pen and paper, because that was essentially what we did. Me and the old man, he doesn't use the computer as much as possibly he should, but we sat down and we wrote it out on pen and paper, what our costs were for feeding out supplement, because we did it in a dry year, not unlike the two we've just had, and we wrote it out, and the profit that we came back with just didn't really make sense for the workings that we were doing earlier on, sitting in the dairy shed and writing it in the back of your yellow book, and it should work out, and hence why you go and buy more palm kernel or silage or whatever and put into the cows. So what we did then is we went out and sought people that were actually doing it, and we took our figures along and numbers and threw them on the kitchen table and said, this is what we worked out. Are we right? It doesn't quite seem to make sense that we're not making a lot of money out of this. And the overwhelming answer was, yes, your figures are right. Marginal milk is a thing. And what you're finding is that the margin that you think you're making on milk, or on supplements, is not as big as you once thought. So that's where we came to the big mindset change of not farming for production or targeting production, and coming back to that pasture harvest, essentially. If that answers the question. Sorry, Paul.
No, that's great. Thanks, Robbie. So in terms of creating a budget, getting agreement on it, all of you who are farming here have, business partners. Olin, you've got a farm owner involved in there, so there'll be some level of gaining agreement in this process, and there's also banks involved as well. And so, Daniel, in terms of getting this sort of agreed budget with family partners, bankers, just tell us a bit more about the process that you go through, and then how you keep that communication going, because as we know, things change, don't they? As soon as you do the budget, something is going to change. So how do you create that sort of environment that is constructive and progressive?
So I just touched on that there just before. It's literally producing those budgets 12 months in advance, at least 12 months, and knowing your figures. So knowing what you're spending per cow, per hectare, and yeah, knowing what you think the milk production is going to be. Just keeping that phone line open with business partners and the bank. We use Cash Manager in our business, and that's full access to business partners and the bank manager and accountant. We catch, we have four formal meetings a year. Quite often 2 of them are with the bank manager, definitely 1 with the accountant, have an AGM, and everything is ticked off like it should. A lot of money at stake, and it's a big business, and got to be held accountable. So, but if anything changes along the way, like payout drops, an adverse event happens, whether drought, wet, flood, things can change, budgets can change. We'll make the change, and everyone's aware of that. Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Daniel. And Olin, you have a farm owner involved, and you're talking through the farm management plan, looking at how much milk solids is going to be produced. How do you go about creating that right environment where everyone's on the same page with what's coming up?
Yes, I guess it's our second year on this farm. Paul coming from another share milking job, and I guess and this is probably more relevant to share milkers. You come with your own box of ideas and farming philosophies, and then there'll be historic ones on that particular farm. So there is a little bit of nutting out sort of the sweet spot for both parties to be happy. Now, a tool that we've used very successfully here, it's again out of the Dairy NZ toolkit, the farm management plan, which is part of the diploma, the financial diploma resources. Sit down sort of in March, April, farm input plan. So I'll present a plan of forecasted milk production, and then an input plan on a monthly basis. And this is putting the physical data together that then the owners can sort of agree, and we can have a discussion. So we're looking at grazing costs, fertilizer, so that they can construct their cash flow, and then we'll know within what boundaries we have allocated inputs for the year. So that's a very good document, because effectively we're signing off the running of the farm for the further 12 months, and I think it's a really useful tool for share milkers, that it gives them that little bit of wriggle room. They've got an agreed plan, they can then go off to their own devices. Now, I'm not saying we leave that in the top drawer and don't visit it until 12 months later. We're constantly updating and creating variants around that. As you know, weather will change, milk price will change, but that's a really good starting block for us, creating that farm input plan with our stakeholders.
Just to add to that, Paul, I think budgeting the last couple of years, and particularly probably younger guys like myself or people that are doing budgets, would have become incredibly frustrated at the fact you get to February, you've done this budget, you've spent time on it, and then literally you get to February and you might as well just chuck it out the window, because you've got pasture covers of 1,600, nothing seems to be going right, and what was the point of doing the budget at the start? But it's like Olin said, that budget is a live document to keep re-looking at, and that's how you get the best out of it. Essentially, you've got the policies on farm, like Olin said, you've talked to the stakeholders around it, whether it be the farm owners, people you're working with, business partners, the bank, whoever, and then it's those policies, but making timely decisions will ultimately be the success or the failure of it. So the budget will change, and I don't think any of us sitting here would say that, oh yeah, we stick to the budget every year. We have a budget and we try and stick to it, but things will change, and you just have to react to those. But like I say, control the controllables. Don't try and control milk production at the detriment to your financial budget. Control your financial budget, possibly to the detriment of your production.
Right. Just a quick, moving on to this area of risk before we finish up our discussion. A lot of you, all 3 of you here, you're operating farm businesses with very high profit margins, and so quite robust businesses that can withstand changes, and as you said, Robbie, a a dry summer, changes in milk price. So you've got robust businesses. Just, Mark, just a question on this around risk, because there's a number of different ways to try and mitigate or minimise risk around milk futures, interest rates, looking in various input costs. So just interested in your thoughts around risk.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a good question to follow on from what Robbie said. Like the climate and the pasture production variability feels like a major issue because you see it happening on the farm. And if you try to fill in pasture deficit with feed that's going to be expensive because other people are also trying to buy it at the same time, and it comes with a bunch of other associated costs, that can change the structure of your business and certainly changes your cost structure. The reality is, though, that milk price variability causes twice as much variation in profit as the climate and pasture production variability. So that requires more attention, perhaps. In the main, though, if you do run a profitable, low-cost business, that helps you to be robust to milk price variation, because the low cost means that there's still potentially a gap between the milk price and your cost. So you can continue to operate. There might be situations like where you have high debt levels that you would lead a farmer to consider additional measures to mitigate that milk price risk, like, for example, locking in the milk price ahead of time. But primarily, I think the focus should be initially on what you can control inside the business.
So what I'd like to do now is just ask each of you, you've talked about some of your principles, your philosophies, some of your performance in terms of your business. So in terms of what you'd like to leave the people watching and listening with, it's just one key gem or key message that you've got for people. Mark, I'll start with you. What's the one takeaway you want to leave with people?
Yeah, if we look at the last 10 years of data, profitability and pasture harvest at a national level have been basically flat at best. So there's a real opportunity to look at both of those, profitability and pasture harvest, alongside your business goals and see what can be achieved.
Right. Olin?
I'm thinking if you're looking at your own business right now and you've got a gut feeling that you've benchmarked, you're not performing where you should be, I think it's time to potentially look for a fresh set of eyes. If your stakeholders and team members aren't pointing this out to you, I think it's time to knock on someone else's door and get someone to have a greater look. And probably the other thing, most people's cases, feed costs are going to be the biggest expense, and that's, in my eyes, the lowest hanging fruit. If you can make inroads in those large categories rather than trying to rinse filter socks and use them 6 times and things like that. So you got to go for the biggies first.
Right. Thanks, Olin. And Robbie?
Yep, I think still keep rinsing those filter socks though, Olin. You can do both. Probably the key one, Paul, is control what you can control on farm. Really, is the biggest one. There's just so much we can't control, and like we've learnt that the last few years in the North Island, there's that much. So control what you can control, and just be mindful of looking after the $1 or $2 you've already made, and don't go chasing the dollar that you're probably never going to get to, or if you do get there, you'll lose $2 on the way.
Right. And Daniel, I'm not sure if you rinse your filter socks as well, but what's your key takeaway?
Yeah, we do. Know your numbers. Learn and know your numbers, and that way you'll start talking to other people about them, and you can compare apples with apples. My 2 cents. Great,
thanks, Daniel. And I think for me, listening to you all, the key message I'm getting from this discussion is that, you focus on what you can control, and you've set up very, strong, robust farming systems, relying on, heavy pasture use, and you've got high profit margins, and you're not focusing in on the things that you can't control, like the weather or the milk price. And so that's for me fundamentally, the success of your farming system. So thank you very much all for your time, Daniel, Olin, Robbie and Mark. Really appreciate your input. Once again, I would like to thank our banking sponsors, Rabobank and ANZ, for their support. Also a reminder that there are some links displayed on the video webpage, which you can use to access further information from DNZ, Rabobank and ANZ. I'll now hand over to Hamish Midgley, who is the Head of Business Development at Rabobank New Zealand. Hamish is born and bred in the farming sector and has been an agricultural banker for 27 years. In his concluding commentary, Hamish aligns closely with our panel, but also adds some insights relating to the current debt situation and how to get the best from your banking relationship. Thanks, Hamish.
Thanks, Paul, Olin, Daniel, Robbie and Mark. Really great to get your perspective on business and financial planning. And I must say that these are very aligned with what we're looking for at Rabobank. You all mentioned some great key principles, which I'll reiterate as part of the summary and wrap up that I'll go through in the next few minutes. So I'll give you a view of what Rabobank are looking for in terms of information and communication from our clients. But first, just a little bit about Rabobank. So we were started by farmers, for farmers in Holland in 1898, so 122 years ago. We were set up as a cooperative bank and we remain a co-op to this day. We now operate out of 40 countries around the world as a food and agribusiness specialist bank, and we came into New Zealand in 1994 and have built our market share to 18%, and we're now the third largest agri lender in New Zealand. And what's more important, we're very keen to continue to grow our presence in the New Zealand market. Before I jump into detail, I just want to give you a short update on the macro situation around the dairy debt market. So dairy debt peaked at around $42 billion 2 years ago in July 2018, and that equated to about $23 of debt per kg of milk solids. It's now reduced by $2 billion over the past 2 years to just under $40 billion, which is about $21 per kg of milk solids. And there's been a lot of discussion and even a mention at the start of this webinar around banks wanting farmers to repay principal. But as Daniel said, whether it's repaying debt or putting silage in the stack for harder times, it's about making your balance sheet robust. So in good times, so in times like the dairy downturn of 2014 and 15, you can draw down on some of that strength to get through. So what are we looking for from our clients in terms of business plans and budgets? Well, let's start with business plans or a farm strategy. Now that doesn't have to be a grandiose document. It could be as simple as just listing what your goals and aspirations are, defining where you're at now, working out what are the steps you need to take to get to your goals, and then working out what are the mile markers or milestones that you can check in along the way to make sure that you're on track. And I think Olin gave a really good example of this when he and his family were starting off in New Zealand, building his business plan and budgets to talk to farmers and banks about getting started as a share milker. The other thing I'd mention, with increasing requirements around environmental and sustainability, it's also important to assess where you're at with things like effluent management, water quality, water management, greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. And we're really happy to come and sit with you and help you understand some of the pathways to ensuring that you are regulatory compliant going forward. So once we understand what your goals and aspirations are, it's our aspiration to help you be successful with those and achieve those goals. So if we now look at budgets and cash flow management, Olin, Robbie and Daniel all did a great job in this respect, so I'm merely going to reiterate some of the key points that they made. As if you do this, your bank, your business partners, other stakeholders will all be very happy. So first, in terms of budget, this should absolutely be completed prior to the commencement of the new financial year. Robbie mentioned looking critically at the things that you can control, particularly from a production and a cost point of view. And again, I totally agree with that. You should look at benchmarks to check for any blind spots and areas that you can improve, either from a productivity or cost point of view. And once you've done that, just share the draft budget with your bank and your other trusted business partners, seek any feedback and make any adjustments prior to the start of the new season. Once you're into the new season, it's about managing the cash flow. So all of the panelists were using some form of budget tool and treating it as a live document, and that's spot on, as it allows you to adjust if there is any issues with production or due to drought or payout spikes or troughs and so forth. So a quick adjustment can tell you where you're going to be at the end of the year and whether you need to change anything else. The other thing is monitoring budget versus actual often, and that's really easy to do if you're using one of those budget tools. And once you've done that, you should discuss any variances with your bank as soon as possible, particularly if they're adverse ones. Daniel mentioned knowing your numbers as a key principle, and I totally agree with that. So just finally, communication would be the last thing I would mention. Communicate regularly with your bank, particularly if there is an adverse change. We're happy to come and sit with you and work through options and look for solutions on the way forward. So that's it from me. Thanks again to the panel, and thank you for watching. All the best for the season ahead for myself and the team here at Rabobank, and thank you to the Pasture Summit for putting this event on.
Rabobank, New Zealand's only specialist food and agri bank. A bank working together with farmers for farmers. Our commitment to our rural clients and their communities runs deep. More than a century ago, farmers in the Netherlands made sure they were treated fairly when it came to getting the finance they needed to grow food. They knew they were stronger and had more clout if they got together. That idea has endured with Rabobank across the decades and across the world. It's how we get things done. Combining our extensive global knowledge and strong local networks with our highly regarded Rabo research, we're in this for the long haul. Food and agri is in our DNA. Today, New Zealanders save with Rabobank, and their savings stay in New Zealand to support Kiwi farmers and food producers. These savings are supporting strong, successful, sustainable rural businesses, and they're helping New Zealand. Savers and borrowers, town and country, all coming together. Together is how we can make a difference. We're more productive together. Together we can grow an abundance of healthy food while protecting our world. Together we'll come up with new and better ways to grow food using the latest technology that's environmentally friendly. And together we'll work with our clients to produce great food sustainably and reduce food waste. Together is how we face the future and overcome its challenges.